Sanji hates Jinbei, and it's for a surprisingly good reason. Ever since Jinbei was floated to the top of the fish tank as a Straw Hat candidate, each and every single crew member has loved the idea, with the sole exception of Sanji. The most hilarious thing is that Jinbei himself isn't really aware of this, as opposed to, say, Zoro, who actively engages in Sanji's comical anger, much like a toxic lemon versus a toxic avocado, and consuming them together will always lead to a big ol' storm. However, the best way to describe the Sanji-Jinbei dynamic is like Homer Simpson and Ned Flanders. Sanji hates Jinbei, but Jinbei is nothing but polite to Sanji, which in turn enrages him even more. But what is the origin of this very confusing relationship? Well, to discover that, we need to go back a long way. Along Park. That's where we're going. Because this relationship starts, as many do, with a friendly 69. A chapter 69 to be precise, which features Sanji, Luffy, and Yusaku on their way to Arlong Park after having just beaten the now almost certainly deceased Don Krieg. For the first, and I think only time in the series, Yusaku says something important. He introduces us to the concept of the 7 Warlords of the Sea, going on to name drop Jinbei and state that Arlong was once his equal. And fun fact, this is the scene that leads to the common misconception that Arlong was once a warlord, which is a very strange Mandela effect within the fanbase, where every now and then someone comes along and goes, wait, I thought Arlong was a warlord. And I think it's because Yusaku using the word equal may imply to some that Arlong used to be a warlord and therefore an equal to Jinbei. But I digress, because this is the seed of the Sanji-Jinbei dynamic. The logic here is that Jinbei released Arlong. Arlong then did the opposite of release by mentally and sometimes physically imprisoning Nami, thus leading to a very tragic and torturous childhood, the root cause of which being Jinbei's decision to release Arlong. So in Sanji's mind, Jinbei is directly responsible for Nami's suffering, which is then compounded by the fact that Nami is a woman because of Sanji's existing complex. I mean, that's not why Nami is a woman, but the fact that she is an extra thing for Sanji. When he was but a small Sanjling, the only kindness he received was from women, his mother Sora and his sister Reiju. It took meeting Zeph for Sanji to finally have a positive male influence in his life. So just like Fishman Island itself, this is surprisingly deep, because hurting a woman is the absolute worst thing you can do on the Sanji scale of morality. However, I'd also be lying if I said that breasts weren't part of this equation, because most of Sanji's more, how shall we say, aggressive dynamics tend to spawn directly from Nami. In fact, the very first time he almost got into a fight with Zoro also took place during Arlong Park, and this was because Zoro called Nami a, quote, small fry, and Sanji, in his Sanji way, misinterpreted this as Zoro calling Nami's breasts small. And so a fight almost began, which was stopped by the face of Usopp. However, this is what began the Zoro-Sanji dynamic that we have today. And funnily enough, you won't see this in the Viz translation. They changed it because I think they were trying to stay away from too much titty talk, but you can still see the original scene play out in the subbed anime. With that said, this Jinbei situation is a lot more serious than the argument over chest sacks, and this is where things get a lot more complicated. It's hard to accurately convey this, but before Jinbei's introduction, the fanbase expected him to be a big, scary antagonist guy, because that is how Yusaku portrayed him, this absurdly powerful and ruthless warlord. And to be fair to Yusaku, there is good reason for that, because Jinbei was originally supposed to be an antagonist. In his Viviacard databook entry, it stated that Oda's idea for Jinbei was to have him be a mafia-like underworld boss, controlling Arlong from the shadows, a role which would ultimately be more incorporated into the Doflamingo character. But Oda did not know that at the time. So everything said during Arlong Park was done with the intention of setting Jinbei up as a villain. And with that in mind, of course Sanji hates him, because that's exactly what was meant to happen. Now, the reason why this gets confusing is because a sketch does exist from One Piece Green Secret Pieces showing Oda's original designs for the Straw Hat crew, which includes a fishman who would become Jinbei. However, this character's name is Saigo, and all we really know about him is that Saigo is meant to be good friends with Zoro. But the Fishman Mafia boss and the Fishman Straw Hat crew member were supposed to be separate entities. However, as time went on, Oda fused them into the lovable whale shark who we now call Nakama. However, this creates a huge problem, because now Oda has to explain why his villain that he set up to be villainous and do bad things, Oda has to explain why he's not actually a villain and never did any bad things. Explaining how the Jinbei set up to be even worse than Arlong transformed into an honorable figure who forged a bond with Luffy during the Paramount War saga. And very importantly, Sanji was not there when this bond formed, so he's still operating on his initial impression from Arlong Park. And we would need to address this very immediately post-time skip, which is why our first meeting with Jinbei happens in a group including Luffy, Sanji, and Nami, because we need to solve this Arlong problem that we've created. And what we get here are two very powerful panels of Sanji stating, Jinbei, if you want to give us your explanation, we'll listen. But be warned, the home of our beautiful navigator Nami was destroyed by Arlong. She suffered terribly because of him. Based on what you say, I may never forgive you. Showing us that yes, in terms of physical cutting, Zoro is indeed superior, but Sanji is ruthless when it comes to cutting with words. So Jinbei then launches into the story of Fisher Tiger and Queen Otohime featuring Arlong, and as it turns out, Jinbei freed him because he wanted to stop the cycle of hatred and revenge as per Fisher Tiger's wishes. Was this a good move? No. Definitely not. And Arlong even says as much when he's all like, Jinbei, mate, I'm gonna go kill some humans because I'm incredibly racist. And look, if you want to stop that from happening, then you're going to have to kill me. But again, Jinbei doesn't do that because he wants to stop the cycle of hatred. Which, while well-intentioned, maybe, did immediately doom anyone who was going to cross Arlong's path. Like say a Nami, a Nojiko, or most tragically, a Belle-Mère. And there are some attempts to plug this hole by saying that Arlong bribed officials so that word wouldn't get out that he was a bad man doing bad things. But at the same time, he had a 20 million berry bounty and was known all throughout East Blue as a very bad kill man. So I myself don't really buy that Jinbei never found out, but at the same time, it's a small thing and Oda was in a really tough spot. But you know what? Sanji doesn't buy it either. In fact, his response is one of the harshest things a character has ever said in One Piece. Alright, now kill yourself. It won't undo the crime, but at least Nami will feel a little better. Sanji literally did the internet edgelord kill yourself comment. And I want you all to remember this because it's going to be important later. Everything comes down to Nami, who I will point out did not forgive Jinbei because in her mind there was nothing to forgive. Nami is the one who decided to stop the cycle of hatred and revenge. Because sure, she's had a horrific life and arguably due to Jinbei's actions, but Jinbei didn't mean for that to happen. Well, more accurately, Oda later decided that Jinbei didn't mean for that to happen. But still, Nami was surprisingly chill about this. And at the climax of the arc, we have a symbolic moment of growth as Sanji and Jinbei team up to fight against Wadatsumi, a combination of human and fishman as well as fire and water. All sorts of symbolic wankery and generally poetic goodness. But even then, Sanji didn't move on quite as quickly as Nami. And when Jinbei was asked to join the crew, Sanji is the only Straw Hat who is not smiling. Instead, he's giving an excuse for Jinbei's absence, being all like, guys, wait a second. Look, Jinbei's an important man with important Jinbei things to do. He surely doesn't have the time to join us ever. So it's a complicated dynamic. Sanji sort of begrudgingly accepts Jinbei, but only because Luffy and Nami do. So as a result, there's still that nagging hint of resentment. And you'd think that this might be explored a bit further in Whole Cake Island, but absolutely nothing of note for the relationship happens here. Sanji and Jinbei, for the most part, are physically separated for the vast majority of the arc. Also, to be fair, Sanji has much more important things to be thinking about at the time. The whole crisis of family, the crisis of self, the crisis of Chef with the wedding cake. So in this deep dark moment, even the presence of Jinbei is a positive. But the uncomfortable dynamic would resume during Wano. When Jinbei returns completely out of nowhere, with no explanation for exactly how he knew when and where the raid would commence, again Sanji shows a less than impressed reaction, being more shocked by the appearance of Jinbei than anything else. However, I think that part of this shock can be attributed by all of the female attention that Jinbei is receiving. You know, he's getting a hug from Nami on one side, Carrot on the other. So I do think that's triggered some Sanji jealousy. Jinbei also goes on to form a fun parental duo with Robin, and the two of them get along quite well, which starts a trend of Jinbei having healthy and fun relationships with every woman that Sanji seems to be interested in. And we get a fun hint of Sanji's animosity when they're both helping Luffy get up to the roof. Jinbei appears heroically and Sanji's furious, and he just states, "Who put you in charge? I'm the one dragging Luffy along." And if this was Zoro, he would argue back. He'd say something like, "No, shitty cook, it is I, Sword Man, who will help Luffy." But because it's sweet Jinbei, he just politely apologizes, having no real concept of why Sanji is so angry and just trying to defuse the situation like the accomplished diplomat he is. Although Wano also introduces another problem, which is that Jinbei threatens Sanji's position within the crew. After the raid, Jinbei officially becomes the third most valuable in the crew according to bounties, thus knocking Sanji out of the monster trio and into fourth place, something he is painfully aware of as he despairs on the floor. However, I will say that at no point in the series has Sanji ever had a higher bounty than Jinbei. Even previously, when Sanji was above Zoro at 330 million berries, Jinbei was still an order of magnitude more with 438 million berries. And I suppose if you want to consider it like this, Jinbei was at one point the second most valuable Straw Hat. And I guess there was also a time when Zoro was in fourth place. But here's the thing. Everything about Jinbei seems almost intentionally designed to cause conflict with Sanji. And you can see everything playing out right now on Egghead Island. Sanji and Jinbei are the only two crew members who got Hawaiian shirt outfits, so Jinbei is again encroaching on Sanji's territory. Oh, and also let me know in the comments who wore it better, Sanji or Jinbei, because I honestly think it's Jinbei. Hawaiian shirts are just more flattering for the more rotund of of society. But we also have some awkwardness when Sanji volunteers to join Stussy and Jinbei tags along. Sanji wanted to go with Stussy alone, and then Jinbei's just there all of a sudden. In Sanji's mind, Jinbei is being a very, very annoying third wheel. And again, Jinbei hilariously has no concept of this. And now that Sanji has left them alone, I would expect him to eventually become jealous of the inevitably positive relationship that forms between Jinbei and Stussy, because Jinbei is just a generally likable guy. And, as previously stated, easily forms very positive dynamics with every woman that Sanji covets. But the big thing here is the fight against S-Shark. I think a lot of people were very surprised at just how ready and willing Sanji was to kick the crap out of child Jinbei, but it all makes sense. Sanji's distaste towards Jinbei comes from the impression that Jinbei's actions hurt Nami, and now Jinbei's clone is physically threatening to hurt Nami. So this is the opportunity that Sanji has been waiting for, the chance to take out all of that pent-up aggression towards Jinbei with the very telling line of, "I don't care if you're a kid or Jinbei. You get the death penalty, Jinbei Jr.," which is a callback to Fishman Island when Sanji told Jinbei to kill himself for the crime of hurting Nami. So it all comes together. Particularly with Sanji labeling S-Shark as Jinbei Jr. He doesn't see S-Shark as its own entity. In fact, he's using S-Shark as a substitute for Jinbei and all of the issues that we've been laying down since the days of Arlong Park. It is a stupidly well-crafted relationship, one that is very missable because it gets built up so sparingly and over such a long time that it's easy to forget the few interactions they've had, and even easier to forget Sanji's first exposure to the very concept of Jinbei during Arlong Park. And all I can really say is poor Jinbei. He is an unwilling and unknowing participant in Sanji's increasingly tangled delusions, which is just one of the many amazing subtle crew dynamics meticulously implemented by Eiichiro Oda.